Okay, time for a quick update on the Thunderchild. I started filling some of the voids yesterday. I did a lot of work with it. I'm going to go ahead and put some of this on film. I don't know what some of you use for techniques for filling seams and filling voids. This is just something that works for me. I tend to use Squadron's white putty. I know some of you don't like this stuff. There have been lots of reports of it shrinking. I've never had it shrink, and I think the reason for that is I do not use much of it at any given time. In fact, my favorite tool for applying it is a toothpick, of all things, and a very flat blade X-Acto knife. In fact, that's all this X-Acto knife is ever used for. That blade is fairly dull. I just use it for filling seams because it works just like a little spatula for doing trowel work. Let's start with a big void. When I first looked at this part, and I've spent a lot of time sanding this part actually tonight, because there was some sort of orange peel on the outside of it, and I got rid of that orange peel. Right here, I thought that hole in the center right there was some sort of mold detail. Turns out that's one heck of a void. The two notches on the front of this piece are not voids. Well, it depends on the reference photo. Some reference photos show those notches, some reference photos do not show them. I'm going to leave the notches there because the photos that come from the actual show them. But that big old hole right there is usually a window, or it isn't even there in all of the reference videos. So I'm going to fill that void. Now, first thing I do is I take some of my, not my favorite, just some very cheap nail polish remover. Acetone base, please. I pour it in a little bottle cap. I use bottle caps because when I'm done I can just throw those things away. I keep plenty of paper towels on hand for this. Okay, I'm going to get some of this stuff out of here. First I just clear off the crusty stuff that's dried up, and I get some of the fresher. Dunk it in the acetone, then I start putting it in the hole. Now, the fingernail polish remover acts as a softener for the Sargents. It's a thinner for it. So it kind of thins it out some and tones it down. Bad part about using colored toothpicks is the dye comes off in the fingernail polish remover. Now I'm going to take a Q-tip, dip it in there, and I'm going to use the Q-tip to help smooth this stuff over. Okay? Now, I probably should have zoomed in a little bit on this, so let me go ahead and zoom in a bit, so maybe you guys can see this a little bit better. The Q-tip with the acetone, the polish remover, smooths the stuff out, so I have a fairly good seam on this. Okay, you can see that in the video. Not a good seam, but it fills the thing over so there's barely any imperfection. That is more Squadrons than I typically use at one time, so I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to do another pass on it in a little bit. Okay, I'm going to work on one of the warp engines now. It has a pretty good scratch in the side of it. And I don't know if you guys can see this scratch from there. Let me see if this thing's going to zoom in, where you will actually be able to see that scratch. Yeah, you can see it. Now, I'm going to take some Squadrons and try to fix this with, so let me zoom back out. I'm going to take my toothpick, get a little bit of the Squadrons, dunking it in the acetone, and I'm smearing that in place. Now I got a little too much of the acetone in there, so I need to mix the acetone with the putty so that they are more uniform. Now I'm going to take a piece of paper towel that I've wetted with the polish remover, like that, and I'm going to try to pat this place, the Squadrons in place. Now, another thing I'm going to do is I've got too much of the Squadrons down in here on this. Let me zoom this in a little bit. Okay, I've got too much of the squadrons right in here, so I'm going to take and remove it with this, trying to leave the squadrons only in place where it should be. Alright? Then, if I find I've got some squadrons in some nooks and crannies, I just use the toothpick and get that off there. Okay? And just clean it out before it has a chance to set up. Now I'm leaving something of a ridge over the imperfection here. I'm going to let that cure up, then I'll hit it with some sandpaper. Just noticed I didn't quite hit that spot as well as I'd like, so I'm going to dig some more squadrons out of here with my toothpick, wet it down, and get it built up over that one spot. Now this spot's a little tricky because it's kind of shallow, so I'm not using my usual technique, or the technique I used on the bridge, of wiping that stuff off with the damp paper towel as much as I would. And I am going to leave that built up a little bit. The squadron sands off really well with wet sandpaper, so we're going to let that cure up. This one here has a couple of ridge lines in it. I guess it's where the mold was released. I'm trying to find them real quick. What I do with ridges, okay, maybe it doesn't have the ridges. But what I did with the ridges is I smeared the squadrons all over it in a pretty thin layer and just sanded it down really well. And it got rid of it. Ah, there's a spot. If I were to take some close-up photos, you'd see little white lines all over this piece because I put the squadrons all over it and then sanded it down to get those little tiny ridge lines filled in, so the whole piece is really, really thin and smooth. In fact, I'm seeing some spots I don't like right now, so I'm going to get a little bit more squadrons out of here. But for this one, I think I'm going to go ahead and use the knife. So I dig a little squadrons out. The reason I'm using the knife is this ridge is long. So I'm just spreading that out. Kind of like I'm putting spackle on a wall. And I'm thinning it out pretty good. Kind of using the knife blade itself to force the stuff down in that groove. And it wasn't a very big groove. That's one of my flaws, is I tend to be kind of uptight about a few things, and I start looking for perfection instead of just getting her done. Okay? Other than that one little spot, I didn't find much on this one. So I'm going to let that sit aside for a little bit. Now, the saucer section, I did a lot of work with this one the other day. There's a couple imperfections in a few places, but I left them, like right here. The reason I left it is parts go on top of that. You will never ever see that. Okay? Now, there were a couple of voids on this that I wanted to fix. I'm not finding them very easily. So I think we're going to call this video quits for right now.